race that was. The streak has ended under the lights of Singapore. It was Carlos Sainz scoring the first non-Red Bull win of the season from pole, followed home by Norris, and on the last lap, a Lewis Hamilton third place. We'll get into that after a fiercely contested Grand Prix this afternoon. Behind the podium, Russell crashed out on the final lap. It's why Hamilton finished third. Lawson scored his first points in Formula One, and the Red Bull duo, surprisingly, 5th and 8th. But actually, it could have been worse for them this afternoon. I'm Martyn Lee, back in the hot seat after a couple of weeks off paternity. Thank you for the lovely messages that people have been sending. And for Bryn standing in last week, showing me exactly how it should be done. On the line today, we go to Matt Q, live from Marina Bay, and Alex Kalinauckas, our Grand Prix editor, back home. Welcome both. Okay, let's kick off with a performance of Carlos Sainz, second win in Formula One. We got a bit of smooth operator, a really mature drive to finish, fending off a very fantastic drive from former teammate Lando Norris. Sainz even said in a unique tactical move, he was actually slowing down to let Norris get the DRS so Sainz could maintain the win so that Russell didn't get Norris, and then, because he had the tyres to attack Carlos Sainz. So, what do we think of Sainz's second ever win in Formula One?
Well, I think his second win, we were actually comparing it to Giancarlo Fisichella at the media pen, which is when was the driver's first win so sort of fine, but the second win so impressive, such a step forward in performance, and it was mega. We've seen it Sainz consistently sort of negotiate with the Ferrari pit wall about strategy, when to come in, what tyres to take, etc., and he was doing that again, but this time in the lead of the race. So the sort of the spare brain capacity he's got is mega. But it was a brilliant performance. Bit of sort of context behind it is at Zandvoort, where he spent ages going through every detail of this car to understand what makes it tick. And that meant moving towards a bit of an understeer setup to get away from the unpredictability. And that's why not only has Sainz been mega, but he's actually probably had the upper hand over the last few races over Leclerc, because the driving style and the cars moved towards him. And with Ferrari and with Red Bull dropping the ball this weekend, he was mega and executed his race really well. So props to Carlos. It's quite a run of form he's on at the minute.
Yeah, I thought it was magnificent from Carlos. I think if you think back to his first one in Silverstone, it was a sort of race that he almost inherited twice, really. This one, totally crushed it, like totally crushed it. Led all the way from pole position. I think the fact that Leclerc was able to get Russell right back at the very start using those soft tyres, that could not have worked out better for Ferrari, because at that point, you got to the stage that we always see in Singapore where they're driving around to a set slow time, and it's just about getting the tyres to a certain point. But for Ferrari, it's all about sort of managing the gaps behind. It meant that, the cars immediately following them. With Lando Norris, with the Mercedes drivers, they couldn't then pit because they'd be stuck in traffic. The undercut is powerful here, and I thought at one point, they were asking Leclerc to drop back, things like that. Are they a little bit worried about what happened here in 2019 when Sebastian Vettel was able to undercut and beat Charles Leclerc that day? And that was a victory against sort of the form book. I was like, oh, is that what Ferrari are considering here? Are they sort of making sure that doesn't happen again? Are they protecting for the double stack pit stop that we did see in the end? But whatever they asked of Sainz, he did it. And I just thought that was absolutely magnificent. And then, as you said, Martyn, the giving Norris DRS, I'm pretty sure it's not coming to the top of my mind, but I'm fairly sure there was a Red Bull race. I could even be Mercedes. Anyway, the chasing car is in third, and then there's their teammate is in the lead. And they're like, oh, can the other car slow down? They're like, no, we can't do that, because then the car in second place will get DRS. And it just ended up being crucial for Sainz, because those Mercedes cars were arriving at an absolute rate of knots. And he played it really cleverly. We heard it on the radio. It clearly wasn't like, he did look like, oh, has he fried his own tyres? Has he sort of actually messed this up? No, he was under control completely. He was like, I need the gap to Norris. I need to know where he is so that I can give him the DRS. And I thought that worked sensationally well. And it just, we've always said this about Carlos, is that he's very, very clever. I still don't think he's got Leclerc's ultimate turn of speed, all things being like top Ferrari stuff, but he nailed it this weekend. And he's combined that speed ever since Zandvoort. He's been absolutely phenomenally fast, pole position in Monza, did terrifically well in the race in Zandvoort, and he's just combined that extra, reaching Leclerc's speed level to shade him in qualifying here, and then delivered one of the cleverest wins I think we've seen for a very long time in Formula One.
Of course, it's a high-risk manoeuvre, though, making sure that the car behind you has the DRS to defend the car behind them. There was one corner, I think, where Norris went in a little bit deep, and Sainz probably had to slow down to let him catch up. But if he'd have got that timing wrong, and we've seen it in qualifying as well, where drivers try to give the toe and it goes wrong. If he gets that wrong and he loses the win, he looks stupid today, but he didn't. It was a masterful Grand Prix win. Was Lando Norris disappointed about finishing second? It could have been his maiden Formula One win. No, not at all. McLaren over the moon. Andrea Stella afterwards saying that the minute the two Mercedes pitted for those new mediums, clearly that was the tyre to be on at that stage of the Grand Prix. They had a spare set that their competitors didn't. Andrea Stella said afterwards he started to mentally prepare what he was going to say to the team, to the media. Don't be disappointed. We missed out on a podium. We lost it to the Mercedes. Lots of good positives. But then he realized, hang on, I think we can do this. What do you think about Lando's run to second? Was a win ever on the cards, or is he right just to be happy with another second place on the podium?
Yeah, I don't think the win was ever on for Lando. I think if you look at the way the circumstances were before Ocon's incident and the VSC coming out and the Mercedes cars pitting, he was never really in the lead fight. It was, the story of the two Ferraris early in the race, and then Russell, could he get past Carlos Sainz? And even with things seemingly being pretty equal at the front, Carlos had it under control. It never looked like George even was gonna mount a move, even when Mercedes were like, right, we're gonna really try and push him along here. So I think for Norris, it's not really a win lost. It's just a podium preserved, and I think he did excellently as well to keep his tires in the same shape and resist the pressure from Russell. I think also think Martin, when you said Lando went deep or something, was it not? I think also, or maybe there are two things that happened, but I definitely when Russell was alongside Norris, that's what caused him to drop out of DRS late on, and Sainz basically had to wait for him, which was pretty impressive. And I really enjoyed that sort of. There was a moment in Parc Ferme where Leclerc had come through and was giving Sainz a quick hug and a congratulations, and then Sainz turned around and Norris is there, his great man. He's like, "Yeah, mate, come on, this is brilliant." It was just a really nice little sort of celebratory moment for the two. But again, Lando Norris is doing terrifically this season, and it really struck me, when you had that grid of Sainz, Russell, Leclerc, Norris, it's like, wow, these 4 or 5 years ago, these were the real young generation, and now they're properly heading the grid. Obviously, there's a very good reason why the Red Bulls weren't in there, but yeah, just a real sort of feel good story, I think. And yeah, no, I think Stella's nailed it. Really, they suddenly thought what they thought they had was going to get away from them already, a sort of and not necessarily thinking they might be on the podium, because you'd expect the Red Bulls to factor for at least one of those positions. Thought they'd lost it, got it back. I think they're mature enough and clever enough to know just got to celebrate what you can get rather than lament what you never had.
A Lando win is going to go down so well with a lot of fans. Let us know in the comments below if you think Lando was ever on for the win today, or whether he should be over the moon with a second place. Was he lucky to even be on the podium? We'd love to read your comments below. As for Mercedes, their late VSC pit stop, they had that fresh set of mediums they could put on the cars, almost worked out. They were closing over a second a lap, and at the end, Russell's tyres looked worn. I wonder whether, as he closed up to the leaders, whether the car would get a little bit hot and it'd taken a lot out of the tyres. What happened there, do you think, with Mercedes and Russell, apart from obviously that last lap crash? But could they have won today? Did Carlos Sainz and that Ferrari package just on today have enough in the bag to defend? What did you think?
I think that had Russell been able to clear Norris, I think it'd have been very, very hard for Sainz to preserve the victory. But as you say, Martin, it did look like the tyres had gone on the Merc, particularly on Russell's car. I don't think they was necessarily worn. I think he just really overheated them once he reached the back of the McLaren, and it's just more sliding. You saw it was more twitchy, and Lewis Hamilton wasn't doing that. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Obviously, Lewis had quite a controversial start to the race. I think it was a little bit overplayed. I think Lando was wrong to say, oh, he never had any intention really of making the corner. Lewis just braked later, and then unfortunately he almost did it too well. I think like Russell was there taking the line as you'd expect, and then Lewis just floored it. That was the thing. I think it's when he went off, it obviously to Lando's mind looked like, oh, he never even braked or whatever. I think he did. Just found his teammate there, and then the circumstances suddenly made it look like Lewis had this big devious plan, but I don't think that was the case there. So basically that then sort of compromised his race, really, didn't it? He had to let Russell back through quite rightly, let Norris through as well. So it just made it a lot more complicated. And then when you had that final stint charge, I think as good as George Russell was this weekend, and he was absolutely excellent. And I'm really pleased for him because obviously he had that amazing start to the year, was doing really, really well, then almost went completely off the boil, unfortunately, just as Autosport, me, had interviewed him at the Spanish Grand Prix about what a good start he was making. Then it took a massive dip dive down. So apologies for that, George. But basically, as good as Russell was this weekend, you saw in that final stint where Lewis still has that slight edge on being able to keep the tyres in just the perfect or the less bad state, for want of a better explanation, right? He can still do it. It's like Verstappen. He's a tyre master. He's just able to do things that, that's why they're the real superstars, those two. So yeah, unfortunate for George in terms of that, and I think perhaps Mercedes, if they are going to be reflecting on anything, it was like, oh, what could it have been if the other car had been in front? And then you have the crash at the end, and it's really interesting. Obviously, so I'm back in London, watching the Sky Sports coverage, and Martin Brundle at one stage talked about what it's like to be racing on a street circuit, and about how you can almost get lost sort of with the eyes of following another car so closely in front of you and the walls so close. And that seems to me to be exactly what happened with George Russell on the last lap. Lando Norris hit the wall, and I think George hits the wall in sympathy because he's so focused on what that McLaren is doing. And it's just really, really unfortunate. He was nailed on for a podium. Lewis was never going to attack him, let's face it, on the last lap of his teammate. And yeah, a devastating ending. But at the very least, I think George has come out and said, he feels like he's driving back to his best. And we saw him doing really well in Monza, even a race where Mercedes with the low downforce, low drag package had an awful time of it. He was still shining when he wasn't getting penalties and things like that. But you know what I mean? He was fast. So at the very least, he might not have anything to show for it. Still no points in Singapore, but he can reflect on the fact that was a tremendous performance this weekend.
The Red Bull team won't be too happy this weekend, or maybe they think they did better than they would have done at one point. Perez rejoined last. They didn't pit under the safety car. They went for the alternative strategy and track position. Max made a great recovery drive, but just the VSC fell in the wrong place. They just pitted, and then they could have take advantage of that. So it was an unlucky day for Red Bull, compounded with a circuit where they were just not quick. The record-breaking run comes to an end, but it was a recovery drive that I think at the end of the day, they probably should be happy with that result. Do you agree with that? What do you think?
I think the first place to start with Red Bull will be the technical directive that came in for this weekend, because a few people were looking at that and going, well, the ban on flexible parts, and then the FIA being a lot stricter, and Red Bull have suddenly fallen away. Are those related? Does this sort of make the rest of the success a bit murky? Well, Red Bull are insistent 0 parts have changed on the car as a result of that technical directive. Correlation is not causation. So, that RB19, one of its success points has been its control over ride height and having such a wide operating window. Well, the challenges of Singapore, street track with some bumps, some very high curbs, they've had to raise that ride height, and that's taken a car out of the sweet spot. So that's why they've fallen away. But how much of a disaster is it? Because Friday and Saturday were nightmares, but by Sunday, the race pace is absolutely comparable to Ferrari, Mercedes. So already it's taken them one weekend to understand this car and fix it. So it should come back for Suzuka. And then there was, their simulations or their predictions for the race. None of them showed a path to winning, they say, but it only takes sort of a well-timed red flag or an incident, and you get that free tyre change, and then suddenly you're thrust into contention. However, for Red Bull, it went the other way around. That Sargent safety car, when came, as the team said, at the worst possible time, and they tried to run it long on the hard tyres, and then after that, events never sort of came towards them. But if you've got your worst weekend of the year, and it's a double points scoring result in 5th and 8th, I think you absolutely take that. And Red Bull aren't head in hands. They knew they weren't, well, they said they weren't going to ever get a 100% record this season. It had to end at some point. So yeah, why not Singapore if everything should come up roses again in Suzuka?
Yeah, I think this was a good result for Red Bull, considering how things might have been. Like Verstappen still nearly beat Leclerc, and he started like 8 places behind him or whatever. So that just shows you that what happened to Red Bull this weekend with all the stuff with the setup and having to run the car a little bit higher, it fundamentally hit them hardest in qualifying. And I wrote a column on the Red Bull basically saying that they were fearing this could happen at Monza. And actually, I sort of the one element of that I focused on was the track changes for this weekend, meaning that the track is 4 corners shorter and they're quite demanding high energy corners in terms of, like, especially when you got the as we were talking about earlier, the tires being hot and sliding around like Russell was experiencing late in the race. That at a stroke helps Red Bull's rivals over one lap and hurts Red Bull because they warm their tires up ever so slightly slower. So Sergio Perez talked about that after qualifying, and I think that's a real big factor in their defeat, because come the race pace, the Red Bull was maybe not as quick as it usually is. It was still mighty compared to the rest, and I think that had Max started up there amongst the cars that went on to stand on the podium, or sorry, the drivers of those cars to stand on the podium, I think he would have been in the mix, because that car is just much better in race trim. So yeah, sort of a bit like, yeah, it could have been worse for Red Bull. I mean, it could have been better just because, as you say, Martin, the timing of the safety car. If you start on the contra strategy, you always leave yourself open to that. You are hoping for a safety car, if you assume there's going to be no safety car, what you're banking on is being rapid at the end of the race, as Verstappen was. But there is always the risk, particularly in Singapore. It was a bold one. I'm surprised they didn't split the strategies for the 2 cars, but they went for it. Didn't quite come off, and as Max said, I think the swear word that ran through his mind as soon as he saw the safety car coming out, it just couldn't have been worse timing. So yeah, a fascinating weekend for Red Bull, really. As good as Sainz was, and as amazing as that story is for Ferrari, the concurrent, the running alongside of it is how bad Red Bull were after this amazing season, this amazing run that they've been on. That's as big a story, I would say, as Ferrari taking a victory.
A quick plug for the Autosport podcast, the Saturday one, the qualifying podcast with Jake Boxall, our technical expert. I did put it to him, the conspiracy theorists online. I said, look, there's 2 new technical directives this weekend. Have Red Bull been caught doing something? Absolutely not. It is coincidental. They're running the same bits as Monza. There's loads of reasons why Red Bull didn't perform this weekend. Let's talk, though, about one of the problems that Red Bull wider team have, and it's actually after I think a while with a little bit of a lack of drivers coming through their young driver program, and just young drivers on hand to have. Now they've got the problem of Liam Lawson, first points in what was another really impressive drive in Formula One. Can he end up on the grid in 2024? More importantly, closer to home, can he continue this incredible form into Suzuka?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Singapore's, the humidity, the heat, the endurance is one of the hardest tracks, and he's coped with it admirably. And he was, qualified exceptionally well, 11th place, and that put him right in the thick of it. He's got points, and the contrast between him, because it's a 2-horse race for one seat. So Daniel Ricciardo will be at AlphaTauri next season. So it's between Lawson and Tsunoda. Tsunoda, after 3 seasons, he is a known quantity what he can do. Lawson's come in, hasn't put a foot wrong, hasn't ruffled any feathers. And then you've got that contrast, haven't you, between his points and Tsunoda, retiring on the first lap, albeit I think that's a lap better than he managed in Monza. So in 62 races time, he'll be doing a full race distance. But no, I think that shows where it's at now with Horner. Marco, very impressed with what he can do. I think he's absolutely smashing this audition for the AlphaTauri seat. And just in terms of how we got here was obviously with Nick de Vries. He had that one race in the Williams. Well, Lawson is achieving arguably more impressive results over a more sustained period. So yeah, I think he's an odds-on favourite to be a full-time F1 driver next year.
Yeah, I mean, just terrific from Liam Lawson today to score your first points, even at this stage of someone's Formula One career. 3 races in. Okay, he started well down in the middle of the season, but that's a tremendous result, and in such a hard, demanding race. I know it was slightly easier for the drivers this year because, as I talked about, those corners being gone, it meant the race was a little bit shorter. It meant that it wasn't quite as demanding physically on them. That's, to be clear, that's still within it was still extremely hard for them. So fair play to Liam Lawson for coping with that. And his teammate didn't. I haven't seen the actual onboard of where Perez was in his positioning of Yuki Tsunoda, but it to me looked like, where did Yuki think that car was going to go? And then he's out on the opening lap. And it all just felt a little bit, you get that with Yuki sometimes. He's capable of some terrific performances, but occasionally just these critical misjudgments go wrong for him. I mean, like I said, I haven't seen the full set of replays, so there may be more evidence, but just the replays that were shown from the cars coming from behind the incident, you know, it just looked a little bit off to me based on that reading. But yeah, that's totally separate. Of course, Liam Lawson producing terrifically. He goes to a track next weekend at Suzuka that he'll know well from Super Formula and, you know, racing in Japan, and I think he was very excited and hoping he'd get there anyway. And we just know for Daniel Ricciardo, that recovery, it's, you know, we know Lance Stroll came back after, you know, very quickly after his wrist incident, but you just don't want to rush these things. And I think Ricciardo will be looking forward to when he does get back in the car. But yeah, what is interesting is that there was this sort of sense going around the paddock that Red Bull wasn't overly impressed by Lawson, particularly in Zandvoort, that he just hadn't wowed them yet. Well, if he hasn't wowed them now, I don't really know what else he can do, because that was terrific, and he's doing everything he can do to make himself a really viable candidate to have that seat full time in 2024.
Well, let's finish off, Matt, with talking about Aston Martin. We talked about McLaren earlier on, how, you know, we're now saying, oh, McLaren disappointed not to get the win. Can you imagine saying that first couple of races of the season? But Aston Martin, it seems that it's the inverse of the McLaren story. Aston Martin, their pace has gone away as the season has gone on. Matt, what do you think about Aston Martin's poor performance? What's going on there?
Yeah, Aston's probably actually the hardest one to explain of the lot, really. They're a lot less emphatic when asked about the relationship to the technical directive than Red Bull. So whether you want to read too much into that and say that, you know, flexible parts has taken it away from them, but, you know, the simple sort of way everyone was looking at it is Monaco, they were mega. That was their nearest threat to Verstappen. They could have, you know, challenged for the race win, and you come to a somewhat similar track in Singapore and then nowhere, and that is one of Alonso's messiest races I've seen for ages. You know, running wide at the pit entry, they cut to him spinning down an escape road, didn't he, at some point after he put on the softs. It was a really messy race, no pace in the car, and certainly not a part of that usual Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren fight we now have. So I think some elements of it is Aston Martin losing out in the development race, and the relationship to the TD, and that's not me like playing it cool and go, oh, it is a TD, but I'm not allowed to say it. There isn't that understanding at the minute, but that is certainly something to watch in Suzuka as well, I think. But yeah, pretty disastrous for Aston. And Mercedes, all right, Russell crashed, but Hamilton's podium place takes them a bit further out of reach, and McLaren's mega form means it might come down to the wire for that fourth place in the Constructors' Championship.
All right, Matt, we'll let you go. Thank you so much for joining us from the circuit. It's such a pleasure to be able to come to you and hear your answers from there. And I know that our Grand Prix editor, Alex Kalinauckas, will be back on the road very soon, and we'll be doing the same with him. But gentlemen, thank you both for joining me back on the show today. Now we want to hear from you about any of your thoughts on today's Grand Prix. What do you think about Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris? George Russell's going to have a difficult evening and morning. But you know what? Formula One drivers are like, they're so resilient. They'll have a terrible night, terrible morning, and then by tomorrow lunchtime, all forgotten about and complete focus on Suzuka. So, but it's difficult, I know, for Russell to swallow at this time. What do you think of all those topics and more? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. If you're new to us and you haven't hit subscribe yet, just make sure you do and give us a thumbs up if you like the video. It tells us to make more just like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.